Myths are stories, symbolic tales that direct our actions, that lie at our understanding of life. The primary driver of most global conflict, oppression of women, suppression of science, persecution of gay people, and abuse of power is not religion. It is, he says, the extreme fundamentalist wings of all the world's religions that provide all these dramas for the rest of humanity. I would add two things to that observation. First, religious groups who are seeking political dominance usually adhere to fundamentals that are conspicuously lacking in compassion or empathy. And second, that those religious fundamentals give way to repressive and punitive actions when fused with political power. Christian nationalism is that kind of fusion. A post on the website of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., recalls that when Bishop Marianne Budde preached at the Interfaith Service of Prayer for the Nation in January, she beseeched President Trump to have mercy on the most vulnerable among us. Her words, the post says, triggered an avalanche of Christian nationalist condemnation. Much of it highlighted what her critics literally called the sin of empathy. Their argument was that empathy amounts to a false gospel of kindness that enables a culture of coddling and weakness. The Speaker of the House commented. Bishop Budde hijacked the National Prayer Service to promote her radical ideology. Shameful. A group of legislators presented a resolution expressing the sense of the House of Representatives that the sermon given by the Right Reverend Marianne Edgar Budde was a display of political activism and condemning its distorted message. I've always been of the persuasion that Jesus was big on empathy, welcoming sinners, eating with them, risking personal contamination by healing people with repugnant diseases, telling stories of how someone in an ethnic group that was despised by the people hearing the stories had empathy for a person who had been robbed, beaten, and left for dead. And in doing so, that person surpassed in godliness the two religious leaders who had passed by and ignored the situation. But I can see how empathy would have been dangerous, supremely disadvantageous to carrying out the Crusades, the Inquisition, the doctrine of discovery, the Salem witch trials, the slave trade, pogroms, the Holocaust. All of that depended upon the dehumanization by the religious establishment of those who were to be chastened, exploited, or exterminated by the government. No room for empathy. Some of us are old enough to remember how after World War II, questions abounded. How did so many seemingly good people who loved their families, who were church members, take part in the atrocities of death camps and genocide? I was only following orders was the frequent response from those on trial for war crimes. And there was much sociological and psychological assessment of how people could follow those orders that went against any sense of compassion, that seemingly betrayed any teaching from the Gospels. The general conclusion was that Germany was in such a demoralized state after their loss in World War I. People were starving. The Kaiser, and Kaiser is a Germanized rendering of Caesar or Tsar, emperor. The Kaiser had fled. The Kaiser had been a swaggering militarist whose incompetence as a head of state left the structures of government in chaos. The task of planting a fragile new democracy in the soil of that shambles was overwhelming for the state of Germany. The whole process had come suddenly and uninvited as a product of military defeat and the pressure of Germany's enemies, so that when the National Socialists, the Nazis, came onto the scene, they were able to summon a following who yearned for order and for the reemergence of a national identity. And in that climate, observers concluded, people followed orders. Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, for example, picked up on the discordant tones in Hitler's voice. He wrote in a letter to his grandmother, I always like to hear about offspring writing letters to their grandmothers. He wrote in a letter to his grandmother in 1933, "It has become ever more evident to me that we are about to be given a great, powerful, national church whose nature cannot be reconciled with Christianity. And we must prepare our minds for the entirely new paths which we will then have to follow. The question is really Christianity or Germanism, Christianity or nationalism. And the sooner that conflict is revealed in the clear light of day, the better." He later put it more tersely. "Only the one who cries out for the Jews may sing Gregorian chants." Christian nationalism is not new. Amanda Tyler describes Christian nationalism in America as a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to fuse American and Christian identities, but merely uses the veneer of Christianity to advance its own aims. It points not to Jesus of Nazareth, but to the nation as the object of allegiance. Christian nationalism promotes the belief that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, and it seeks to enlist government to enforce laws that privilege a particular version of Christianity. The speech that Senator Eric Schmidt delivered this September at the National Conservatism Conference was very clear in its declaration that America is a white Christian nation. He said, "We Americans are the sons and daughters of the Christian pilgrims that poured out from Europe's shores to baptize a new world in their ancient faith. Our ancestors were driven here by destiny, possessed by urgent and fiery conviction, by burning belief. Devoted to their cause and their God, they repelled wave after wave of Indian warband attacks to build this country. It belongs to us. It's our birthright, our heritage, our destiny. When they tear down our statues and monuments, mock our history, and insult our traditions, they're attacking our future as well as our past. By changing the stories that we tell about ourselves, they believe they can build a new America. With the myths, he's onto myths too, with the myths of a new people. But America does not belong to them, it belongs to us. It's our home. It's a heritage entrusted to us by our ancestors. Are we, constitutionally and theologically speaking, a Christian nation? Were we founded as a Christian nation? There is really no evidence of that in the Constitution. The words Christian, Christianity do not appear. And we're probably all aware that the First Amendment prohibits the government from creating a state-sponsored religion or favoring one religion over another, and guarantees the rights of individuals to practice their own religious beliefs and rituals without government interference. And then there's Article 6 of the Constitution. The Constitution is arranged with the preamble first, and then there's articles before the amendments. And those first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. Article 6 declares in its second and third clauses that the senators and representatives and the members of the several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath of affirmation to support this Constitution. But no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. And this was kind of a big deal. When the Constitution was written and signed, most of the state constitutions or colonial charters contained some form of a religious test for holding political office, public office. These ranged from affirming a belief in Christianity in Maryland to affirming the doctrine of the Trinity in Delaware, to disallowing anyone other than Protestants from holding public office in many of the states. In 1787, many believed that a civil government could and should enforce morality by requiring church attendance, personal statements of doctrinal beliefs, and financial support for churches. Thus, the no religious test clause was a radical departure from accepted norms. Amanda Tyler reports, when Article 6 was ratified, those who wanted a Christian nation lost the debate. Oh, and that first clause of Article 6 is the foundation for the federal government's authority over the states. It declares that the U.S. Constitution, federal laws made in accordance with it, and all treaties are the supreme law of the land, and that state judges must follow it, even if state laws conflict with it. So what is the MAGA story about America? What is the MAGA myth? And we all probably have heard articulations of it. I think I first encountered it 20 years ago in the writings of James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family and the Family Research Council. and a strong proponent for the Bible, his interpretation of it, shaping public policy. A child psychologist by training, he wrote and spoke engagingly during his long lifetime. In his book, Straight Talk for Men, he bemoaned the murkiness that obscures sex roles today. He lamented with regard to husbands, alas, is there anything that distinguishes his role from his wife's? And where can he go to find out what is expected of him? Historically, married men were not so uncertain. They understood intuitively that two family responsibilities exceeded all others in significance. They were expected to protect and provide for their wives and children. You can be sure they felt strongly about that obligation. If you insulted a woman in the 19th century or before, you would have dealt shortly with her angry husband. He would not have hesitated to lay down his life for her if necessary. He was the defender of her honor, and she felt secure in his care. He took great satisfaction in what he contributed, materially and otherwise, to the welfare of his family. My reaction when I read that 20 years ago was, huh? Really? This was the case for everybody in the 19th century and before? Just confining my limited brain power to the 1800s, where did I get the impression that there were men who beat their wives or couldn't hold a job or who were so lost in a haze of alcohol that the responsibility to protect and provide for their wives and children seldom bobbled into consciousness? Having replaced the Jesus of the Gospels with a vengeful warrior Christ, it is no wonder many came to think of Trump in that same way. In 2016, many observers were stunned at the white evangelicals' apparent betrayal of their own values. In reality, those evangelicals did not cast the vote despite their beliefs, but because of them. How do those of us who are Christians but not Christian nationalists relate to this president, of whom it is said he has no moral core, whose only principle is tariffs, whose motivation is greed for power and wealth, who has told his supporters repeatedly, "I am your retribution"? Bishop William Barber of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, leader of the Moral Mondays and Witnesses, he drafted a pastoral letter to the president dated August 28th. My signature, along with hundreds of others, maybe some here, is on it. It begins, "Dear Donald, we are pastors, addressing you here not by your title in the office of President of the United States, but by the name you bear as a sacred child of God. We saw in the news last week that you said you want to try to get to heaven if possible, but that you are hearing you are really at the bottom of the totem pole. We've been pastors long enough to know that fear isn't a sustaining motivation for spiritual growth, but it does get some people started, especially older people who've carefully avoided addressing their own mortality. We all die. And before we meet our Maker, we each have the opportunity to receive the free gift of grace that makes all things new. We want you to know that gift today, both for your sake and the sake of the whole world that is subject to the consequences of your actions. We are aware that some people do not pray for anything but the wrath of God to come down upon you. It is not a charitable prayer, but it is understandable. You have targeted people with words and policies that have made their lives a living hell. Though we are not among those you demonize, or though we are among those you demonize because we disagree with you, we do not join those who pray for your demise. We cannot. We serve a God who calls us to pray for our enemies, and we have taken vows that compel us to offer pastoral care to all people, especially those who are captive to the powers of sin, death, and the devil. When we say our prayers each morning, we ask God to set you free. I will attempt to live up to that standard of commitment, even while, as the text of the letter continues to do, even while calling out the lies upon which Trump's Christian nationalist position is based, and calling him to repentance. All of us who are Christian, of any persuasion, need to do this, need to attest to what Christianity is all about from our perspective, that it is not just one point of view, that there is room for all of our beliefs, that indeed all of our beliefs are welcome. All of us, whether of a religious persuasion or not, must persevere as defenders of the Constitution, the separation of church and state, the reality that no one must face a test of religious belief in this country. And I hope that we will all take heart from the vision expressed by the poet Amanda Gorman. Thus may our crisis be our cry, our crossroad, the oldest ode we owe each other. We chime it for the climate, for our communities. We shall respect and protect every part of this planet, hand it to every heart on this earth, until no one's worth is rendered by the grace, gender, class, or identity they were born. This morn, let it be sworn that we are one human kin, grounded not just by the griefs we bear, but by the good we begin. A myth worth living into. Thank you.